Well, pledging an allegiance. There you go. Something that we're used to hearing about, but certainly not in this country, more akin to places like America, right? Where they have a flag in the corner of every classroom and they pledge allegiance, don't they? And they all love Americans and God bless America and all of that. But what about pledging an allegiance here in the UK? Would that be something you'd be prepared to do? Would that be something that you would honour to our traditional British values, tolerance, understanding, fairness, freedom of speech and all of that? Or do those things still exist? I'd love to hear from you. Would you be prepared to pledge an allegiance? 020 722 4000. Let's get to it, shall we? The government is drawing up plans to make all civil servants, first of all, and holders of public office swear an oath to uphold British values. The Community Secretary, a man called Sajid Javid, says he wants people to set an example to newly arrived migrants by publicly embracing concepts of tolerance, equality and freedom of speech. But the Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott, the London MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, says it won't make any difference.
I have a very diverse population in Hackney, Muslims, West Indians, people from Turkey. They're living in this country because they value what this country has to offer and they respect its institutions, particularly people who originate from the Commonwealth. So I don't think the oath will make any verifiable difference.
Anybody would like to have a suggestion for me as to what would be in the oath? You can quickly mock one up if you like. What are the tolerance, the understanding issues? And are we as tolerant as we used to be? Are we as understanding? Even if something doesn't go our way, do we just bow down and go with it? I'd suggest to you that perhaps we've seen signs that we aren't as understanding as we used to be. I don't know, maybe you see it completely differently. I'd love to hear your thoughts, please. Pledging an allegiance. The former Conservative Culture Secretary, a man called John Whittingdale, has backed the idea.
Of course, I'm a Member of Parliament. Every election following that, when Parliament returns, each MP takes an oath of allegiance. Now, we swear allegiance to the Queen and her heirs and successors. That's part of the procedure of becoming a Member of Parliament. This is a similar kind of suggestion.
Yeah, for people who work in local government to pledge an allegiance. But why would they have to do it? Surely if we're trying to attract migrants or trying to make them feel more welcome or trying to show them the right way to behave, we just do it by the way we behave. What is this thing about pledging an allegiance? Let's see if we can get some explanation. Somebody thinks it's quite a good idea. Dr. Alan Mendoza, Exec Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. First of all, just tell me a little bit about the Henry Jackson Society.
Well, it's a political think tank here in Westminster that's cross-party and looks to promote, preserve and protect the ideas and the principles that make societies free.
Are we free? Are we as free as we'd like to think we are?
Well, that's what I think part of this issue of the oath is actually addressing. I think if you look at what it's come up, it's been produced to kind of deal with. It's been the suggestion that there are changes in this country which have meant that we are perhaps a little less free than we used to be, and indeed that not everyone here might agree with the way the country is going. And I don't mean in terms of political direction, but I mean actually in terms of what it is to be British and to support this country in general terms.
What is that?
Well, I think we have a case where in some recent immigrant communities, and I refer to the Casey Review that came out last week, that we have examples of isolated pockets of isolation, as she termed it, where people think that Britain is not the country it is. So, for example, in some isolated parts of the country, there are Muslim communities that, and when I say isolated, I mean in cities, I don't mean in the countryside. There are Muslims in this country who believe that the country is a Muslim country. Now, clearly that is not a view of what Britain is today.
And how would pledging an allegiance, if I were a member of local government, how would that do anything at all to change that belief?
Well, actually, it's very important. I tell you why. Because local government is a over the years has been and often derided unfairly, in my view. As a former, I was a councillor, and I think local councillors do a great job. I think local authorities do a great job in bringing services, bringing sort of activities to local communities. In many ways, our problem in this country has been over the years an excessive centralisation at central government level, and local government not being able to reach people in local communities where they have the most power to shape things.
Fine, I understand it from that point of view, but I'm just interested in how practically it would work.
Well, practically, let me tell you, I have seen cases of councillors in various places, some far-right councillors, some who may hew close to the line of Islamism, who clearly don't share the values that most of the rest of the country share, and who are seeking to subvert our system in one way or another. And I think having an oath of allegiance is an important part, just to remind those people why they are in office. It's there to govern for the good of society in general, as opposed to some narrow sectional interest.
If anybody was doing that, and I mean, if you want to use a case in point, there were many things said about what was happening in Tower Hamlets. There are ways and means to remove those people from their positions. I'm interested in where you think this is happening and how practically it would help. So before I was elected a councillor, what would I have to do?
Well, I think very simply, and we don't know what the Community Secretary has in mind for the actual text of the oath, and I've got no idea what he wants to do. And then clearly, a lot of the devil will be in the detail.
Well, no, I'm going to give you a chance to go for that. But first of all, just tell me where and how it would work. We'll play around with it. That's what we do on this.
Hold on. Just as John Whittingdale stated that before members of Parliament take their seat, they give an oath. Before councillors, at the first session of council, when they come in, they will be asked to each, either individually or collectively, answer affirmatively to a pledge that's read out. It's very simple. Now, we don't know if they're going to keep that oath or not, but it's very important symbolically that it happens, because at least nominally, they are then signing up to a set of principles that we expect them to uphold going forward.
But most of our listeners would think that was stating the bleeding obvious, that you would do that. If you were elected councillor for whatever it was, that you would be doing that. So is there evidence? Have you got evidence? Can you name and shame where it is not happening?
Well, you just gave me an example, Tower Hamlets.
Well, he was removed, so you didn't need a pledge of allegiance to anybody.
He was removed, but there are a number of other people around him who are still in place, basically, in places where there are far-right councillors, in places where there are other Islamist councillors. It's clear that Tower Hamlets is not an isolated case in this regard. There are people out there who operate in a manner that is not in keeping with British ideals and principles.
And how does it? Sorry to cut you. I do apologise, Doctor. How does a councillor pledging allegiance impact upon the migrant who is newly arrived to this country?
Well, I think it's a case of giving an example. The example is that those in public service, and again, we've yet to know exactly how, who this will cover, but the general assumption is that for people, and he explained this himself, and I agree with his reasoning, for people to think that they should be buying into these principles, they want to see examples of others doing it. If it is commonly known that everyone in public office does this when they come in, accepts this principle upon themselves, that should in itself be a spur to others to accept that they too have to play their part in Britishness.
With all due respect, I'd refer you to Diane Abbott. You can sign whatever piece of paper you like. There are lots of guys who sign pieces of paper to say they're married. It doesn't stop them doing what they're doing. People sign whatever they want. It doesn't at all impact or affect what they will actually do, does it?
No, on the contrary, this is not a panacea. We understand that this is not going to overnight solve things. However, it is one step in a series of measures that will go some way towards addressing this concern. Of course, this on its own will not solve the problems that the Casey Review pointed out last week. We understand that. However, it's part of a broader set of initiatives which are designed to show that there are certain things that we will stand up for collectively and that we must support, and that if public office holders play their role in this, it will also trickle down to others.
But just finally, if the migrant who's supposed to be impacted, whose life is supposed to be affected by somebody who is in public office signing some oath of allegiance, doesn't actually understand English, how does that work?
Well, that is a second step measure that we've discussed already. In the sense, the case review makes it clear there are a number of proposals. If you take any of these proposals in isolation, you're not going to solve the problem. You're not going to even solve the problem if you make everyone speak English, are you? That's not going to happen either. But what you need to do is bring forward a package of reforms, a package taken together which will impact upon this problem. And if you do take it together rather than separately, you will find that will make a major impact upon the ability of migrants and others to understand what, the obligations as well as the rights that you get as a citizen of this country.
And just so that we are crystal clear, because the show is that we have a good old chat to a guest who I'll give an equally tough time to on the other side of it, Doctor, and then we'll have a conversation about it. And just to be clear, the problem is what?
The problem is that in a number of cases in this country today, we have migrant communities who come in and not understanding that being a citizen of this country doesn't just give you rights, it gives you responsibilities too.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Dr. Alan Mendoza there, Executive Director of something called the Henry Jackson Society.